Well, the first day of the war has drawn to a close, and it's been a tough fight. Both sides suffering a lot of damage, death, destruction. But I think Ravan came up on top, especially because of his son Indrajit. And if this is the case that we can't be defeated, it seems pointless to fight. Let's see what goes on in the second part and how they get over this whole dilemma. So the next day, Ravan sent his most important generals to fight Akampana, Dhum Raksha, and Prahasta. Between them, they had killed hundreds of thousands of creatures and they carried their scars from their many battles with pride. They could fight with bows and arrows, swords and spears, maces and clubs. They could ride in chariots or on horses or on elephants. Each was as large as a mountain, with arms and legs as thick and strong as tree trunks. The monkeys and bears saw them emerging from the city gates and trembled. But Hanuman, Angad, and Sugriv were undaunted, and they stepped out to meet the Rakshas with no fear at all. Hanuman attacked Prashast, knocking him off his chariot with a swipe of his tail. He leaped upon the fallen Rakshas, biting and scratching and pounding him to the ground with his fists and feet. Angad roared and smashed a great rock on Akampana's head, leaving him dead on the battlefield. Sugriv charged towards Dhumraksha, crashing into his chest with a tree trunk and knocking the breath out of him. The other Rakshas fled when they saw their leaders fall. Ravan shook with anger when he heard that his best generals had been killed by the monkeys. It's time to wake up my brother Kumbhakaran. Prepare him for battle without any delay, he roared. Teams of Rakshas scuttled towards Kumbhakaran's quarter. Giant Rakshas lay asleep, his mouth opening and closing as his snores rattled the windows and doors of his palace. Kumbhakaran was not like other Rakshas. He had the gift of sleeping for 6 months at a time, and it was very difficult to wake him because he was a giant. He ate more than all the people in the palace put together. Royal cooks went to work, making all his favorite foods, chicken and venison and wild boar were roasted and fried. Rice was cooked in milk and flavored with almonds and raisins. Mounds of vegetables were cut and mixed with fragrant spices. Mountains of fruit were chopped. Every sweet dish under the sun was brought to the kitchen. Barrels and barrels of wine and other choice liquors were fetched from the underground cellars. All this was piled onto carts and taken to Kumbhakaran's palace. Look, look, that's Kumbhakaran sleeping and trying to beat drums to wake this chap up. There's a restaurant here called Kumbhakaran. I want to go there eat one day because Kumbhakaran was a great connoisseur of food. So meanwhile, some Rakshas jumped on his chest, others pulled his ears and nose, or still others tickled his enormous feet. Fans blew the delicious smells of food in Kumbhakaran's direction. But still, the giant slept on. Finally, the Rakshas dragged kettle drums into the room and bet on them. A conch shell was blown into his ears, and then they drove cows and sheep and other small animals over his chest. Kumbhakaran stirred. Rakshas hurried to call Ravan so that he could talk to his brother before the giant was distracted by all the food. Kumbhakaran, my dear brother with pot ears, rise. Lanka is at war and we need your help, shouted Ravan as Kumbhakaran rubbed his eyes and yawned, causing the Rakshas closest to him to flee for fear of being sucked into his cavernous mouth. Kumbhakaran rolled his enormous eyes and looked at his brother. I'm hungry, he said. I haven't eaten for 6 months. I feel weak. Eat, eat, said Ravan. We have all your favorite foods ready for you. Then gather yourself and enter the battle. The Rakshas need you. We have been attacked by an army of monkey and bears. I'd like to try monkey meat. Maybe we can eat them after I have killed them, said Kumbhakaran. There'll be lots more food after the battle, said Ravan. Now eat what's here and let's get going. Kumbhakaran ate and drank till there was not a crumb or a bone left. He stumbled out of the palace and made his way to the battlefield. Ground shook under his feet. He had no need for any weapons as he used his gargantuan hands to grab the monkeys and toss them into the sea. He trampled the bears underfoot. The Rakshas army cheered and shouted when they saw him, feeling sure the victory was close. As the giants straggled around, wreaking death and destruction, Ram and Lakshman circled around him, firing arrows from their bows and hurling sharply pointed spears. Spears. Kumbhakaran swatted them away as if they were mosquitoes. Then Sugriv, Hanuman, Angad, Nala, Neela all joined in the attack. Hanuman hung onto Kumbhakaran's neck and hit him and punched him. Sugriv whacked his legs with trees. Angad threw rocks and stones at him, but it made no difference to the giant. Ram realized it was time to use the weapons that Vishwamitra had given him when he was a boy. Lakshman! He shouted above the din of battle. We must use the weapons powered by the gods. Watch me! Ram steadied his breath and unleashed Vayu's weapon. It spread through the air with the force of a gale and chopped off one of Kumbhakaran's arms. Once more, Ram concentrated all his energies and let fly Varuna's weapon, which too found its mark and severed the giant's other arm. Blood poured from his wounds, but Kumbhakarna lumbered on, crushing monkeys and Rakshas alike. And then Ram used Indra's weapon, bright as lightning, powerful as a thunderbolt. It lit up the sky as it headed for Kumbhakaran. It passed through his thick neck, cut off his head with its dangling earrings. The head fell to the ground with a mighty crash. Kumbhakaran's body tumbled into the ocean and sank beneath the wall of waves that rose up to meet it. The monkeys and bears let out shouts of joy and jumped and danced around, slapping each other on the back. Ravan wept when he saw his beloved brother fall and vowed that he himself would venture onto the battlefield the next day. Oh, all in all, disaster for Lanka. Day 2. Let's see what day 3 brings. Day 3 logically then should end if Ravan's coming in, right? Let's have a look. We do have a bit more time this time. The day dawned with a blood red sky, and the monkey and Rakshas warriors rode back into battle. Ravan rode out of Lanka on his magnificent chariot, drawn by 8 horses. He shone with his own splendor, his weapons gleaming in his 20 arms. Most of the monkeys had never seen him before, and they were awestruck by his appearance. Some of them turned and fled, but Angad yelled, Courage! Courage, my good monkeys! Stand firm! That day the sky was dark with arrows and spears and missiles. The ground was wet and heavy with bloody and broken bodies. Ravan was everywhere, everywhere. His 10 heads and 20 arms made it impossible to attack him from any side. Indrajit also appeared on the battlefield, sometimes visible, sometimes not, as he used his magic powers to shoot arrows while standing in the sky and over the water. He was able to kill many monkeys at a single arrow, and nothing the monkeys threw at him seemed to touch him. Thousands of monkeys and bears were killed that day, but the army withdrew for the night with the consolation that their leaders, Gavya, Kavaksha, Manda, and Dwinda, had killed Ravan's younger sons. That night, Vibhishan spoke quietly to Ram and Lakshman. I know Indrajit, he said. He will soon conduct a sacrifice using a black goat. He will chant spells and incantations, and he will invoke the gods to make himself even more powerful than before. He will come into battle with renewed vigor and with bigger and better weapons. We must stop the sacrifice. Only then will we be able to defeat him. Lakshman will stop him, said Ram coolly, looking at his heroic brother, who no fear. Lakshman will stop him. Lakshman, go back. Tell him where Indrajit is performing the sacrifice. Hanuman will take Lakshman there and together they will make sure that it remains incomplete. Vibhishan explained the layout of the palace and told Hanuman where the secret chambers lay. He also told him where Indrajit had his sacrificial pit in a hidden part of his quarters. Hanuman and Lakshman set off, each with full faith in the other. They crept into the city and slipped into Indrajit's palace. Following Vibhishan's instructions, they reached the sacrificial areas and hid themselves into the shadow. They saw the great Rakshas warriors who had surrounded Indrajit, waiting for him to complete the ritual that would make it impossible for anyone, god or human, to kill him. Use your arrows now, Lakshman, whispered Hanuman. Attack the Rakshas so that Indrajit will be distracted. Lakshman raised his mighty bow and let loose showers of arrows that fell like rain on the Rakshas. Hanuman pelted them with rocks and stones. The Rakshas cried and shouted and charged towards the monkey and prince. Indrajit heard the commotion and looked up from his sacrifice. He saw his special forces under attack and moved to join them. At that moment, Hanuman jumped down and set free the black goat that had been tethered to the sacrificial post. He kicked away the ritual materials and destroyed the sacrifice. Dark as the rain cloud for which he had been named, Indrajit roared in anger and turned towards Lakshman. Come, Indrajit, shouted Lakshman. Look at me. I am your death. Lakshman and Indrajit fought for hours that seemed like days. Never had so many arrows filled the skies, never had so many spears been thrown, never had so many weapons been used with such ferocity. The two heroic warriors were equally matched, neither getting better of the other. The Rakshas watched in amazement. Even Hanuman stopped and stared in wonder. Gods and other divine beings gathered in the skies and looked down on a battle unlike any they had seen before. Indrajit and Lakshman were now using all the celestial weapons they had at their command, but still clashed in the air and neutralized each other. Finally, Lakshman pulled out a special arrow from his quiver. Its shaft was perfectly rounded. Its feathers had come from Garuda. Its golden tip was sharpened to a fine point. Lakshman steadied his mind and said, if Ram is indeed the most righteous man in the world, if he is acting for the benefit of all three worlds, let this precious arrow kill Ravan's son. It was as if the gods had heard Lakshman's prayer and placed their combined energies behind that arrow, which blazed through the air like a sacred fire. Indrajit saw it coming but could do nothing to stop it. It sliced off his head and returned to Lakshman's quiver. As Indrajit fell, the darkness lifted and the earth seemed to breathe deeply. In the palace, Ravan cried hot tears of grief for his son and lost consciousness. Wow. When he revived, he wept some more. My son, my dearest son, best of all warriors, sweet child that played on my lap, our palace will be dark without you. You had the capacity to challenge even the gods. I loved your brothers too, but you were my great hope. You would have carried the Rakshas to greater glory. I wish I had not lived to see this day. I want to read this again if you don't mind, because at the end of the day, Ravan is a father too, grieving for his son. He says, my son, my dearest son, best of all warriors, sweet child that played in my lap. Our friends, our palace will be dark without you. You had the capacity to challenge even the gods. I loved your brothers too, but you were my great hope. You would have carried the Rakshas to greater glory. I wish I had not lived to see this day. He had me at our palace will be dark without you. You had the capacity to challenge even the gods. That I believe is something every father does think about his child. You have the capacity to challenge even the gods. It's a sad day for any father. I've seen this. The king of the Rakshasas wiped his eyes and looked around at his dejected ministers and courtiers. The death of Meghnad, my son, was known as Indrajit because he defeated the king of the gods, shall not be in vain. His courage and his skills will inspire us. We shall avenge his death. Tomorrow, I myself will kill those puny humans, those princes without a kingdom, whose leaders, those leaders of an army of monkey and bears. Tomorrow we shall fight for our race, for the survival of our people, for our pride and our dignity. But in the city there was neither happiness nor hope. Too many Rakshas had been killed. Too many families had lost fathers and sons and brothers. Rakshas women wept, and the men said to each other, this war will destroy us. Our king has become arrogant. He should return Sita and save us all from death and destruction. Still, when the sun rose, the loyal Rakshas warriors strapped on their weapons and set forth to fight once more. That's what war does. Ravan rode out again in his 8 chariot horse, looking as terrifying as the god of death himself. He was accompanied by his special guards, Madhodara, Mahapaksha, and Virupsha, Virupaksha, Virupaksha, who were eager to fight. Vultures and crows called out in harsh voices. Ravan's horse stumbled, and dark clouds rained down dirty water. Bad omens, I guess. Ravan ignored these omens of defeat. He roared like thunder as he entered the field of battle. Face me, Ram! Bring your brother out too. I will kill him first because he killed my son. The monkeys and bears and Rakshas attacked each other with renewed vigor. The great monkey warriors all moved towards Ravan and his guards. Following Ram and Lakshman and aiding their efforts, Sugriv picked up a huge tree and smashed Madhodara's elephant on the head, and Hanuman went after Ravan's horses as the princes unleashed all their weapons against Ravan. Arrows filled the air as Ram and Ravan used all their magical weapons against each other. Chariots crashed on the ground. Horses and elephants were slashed and ripped apart. Rakshas and monkey alike were stabbed and clubbed and pierced. Ram pulled out his arrows that had been blessed with Brahma. Ravan countered them with arrows he had received from Shiva. Ravan was a great Shiva. Duel between Ram and Ravan went on, but because of his many arms and many heads, Ravan could also counter the attacks from Lakshman. Ravan picked out a magnificent spear that had been made for him by Maya, the sorcerer of the gods. He whispered a mantra over it and hurled it at Lakshman. It pierced Lakshman's chest and came out through his back. Lakshman collapsed, and Ravan's laughter rang through the heavens. Ooh, ha, 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 ha. He shouted, I will give you time to mourn the death of my son's killer. And he went back into his city. Ram fell to his feet beside his brother. Oh, Lakshman, how can you leave me alone in this world? First my kingdom, then Sita, then you. This is the hardest loss to bear. How will I live without you? He wept. Monkeys and bears gathered around, their eyes streaming with tears. Sugriv summoned Sushena, the physician of the bears, and begged him to help. But Sushena shook his head sadly and looked at the ground. Suddenly, quavering old voice spoke up. Hanuman, where is Hanuman? It said. Sugriv turned to see Jambavan trying to get his attention. What do you want with Hanuman at a time like this? Said Sugriv fiercely, barely able to control his emotion. But Hanuman came forward and bowed before Jambavan. Command me, sir. There is one herb that can save Lakshman's life, but it grows on a mountain far away from here, across the seas and beyond the mountains, where the sun rises. You will have to fetch it, Hanuman, before the first light of the day touches Lanka's high towers. Listen, I will tell you where to find it and what it looks like. Hanuman bent over so that he could hear what the old bear was saying. Bring back the Sanjeevani. Hanuman, you are our only hope, whispered the bear. Even before he finished speaking, Hanuman had expanded to his huge size and was preparing to leap into the sky. He flew at a great pace, keeping his eyes on the horizon, looking for the mountain of the rising sun. He flew past them and landed on the peak that Jambavan had told him about. Try as he might, he could not find the Sanjeevani herb. As he searched, the pale golden rays of the sun appeared in the eastern sky. One knew his time was running out. I'll just take the whole mountain with me, he thought, and broke off its peak as easily as if he were snapping a twig. He placed the mountain in the palm of his hand, and with his great tail unfurled behind him like a banner, he began his journey back to Lanka. Look, look, show. So that's Hanuman with the mountain peak on his hand, flying back to Lanka. Faster than the wind, swifter than thought, Hanuman reached the island where the monkeys and bears waited for him. He set the mountain peak down on the shores of Lanka in a flash. Susheshan had found the herb and crushed it with oils and other plants according to Jambavan's instruction. He applied the mixture to Lakshman's forehead and under his eyes and around his nose. Lakshman, pale face flushed, his eyelids fluttered, and he began to breathe. Look, Ram, said the bear gently. Your brother is alive. Ram embraced Lakshman and stroked his hair and kissed his face. Hanuman brought water, and soon Lakshman had regained consciousness. I have had enough of this war, said Ram with quiet determination. Tomorrow I will kill Ravan, get my wife back. Sometimes I feel fighting achieves nothing. Yeah, just death, destruction on both sides.